The first Europeans in this area of North America came from the Basque region and Brittany. These cultures were known for their seafaring and fisheries. Cod fishing became popular off the coast of Newfoundland, eventually encouraging French to explore the region as well. French traders and missionaries traveled to the New World and had some of the earliest interactions with North American tribes. While fur was in high demand in Europe due to the overhunting of animals, it was a cheap luxury in the New World, and French traders took advantage of this economic opportunity. The earliest of French settlements started in Canada, along the St. Lawrence River beginning in early 17th century, and by the early 18th century, the French began setting up outposts near the mouth of the Mississippi. In 1669, Sieur de La Salle, a French fur trader, traveled up the St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes and then sailed down the Mississippi River, arriving at the Gulf of Mexico in 1682. La Salle was able to open up the Mississippi Basin to French traders, who had adapted well to using the rivers of North America to navigate through the interior of the continent. Soon, outposts began popping up in the area between the Great Lakes and the mouth of the Mississippi River. The French soon had control over the Mississippi Basin. French outposts and forts quickly grew in the region to facilitate trade between the French and neighboring tribes. Mobile served as the capital to French Louisiana starting in 1710, before New Orleans stole the crown in 1723. Robert Baird spoke fondly of New Orleans, saying,
"Where on earth can another city be found whose situation is so favorable in regard to the extent of the country, whose productions, as it were, naturally tend to this great center of trade, almost like material substances on the earth's surface to the center of gravitation?"
The French used waterways to connect French Canada and Louisiana together. These waterways not only included the Great Lakes and major rivers such as the St. Lawrence and the Mississippi, but the French also used the Missouri, Arkansas, and Ohio rivers to trade. Tensions increased as land became disputed between the French and British, leading to the French and Indian War, which resulted in the French losing their eastern and Canadian territories to Britain, and the rest of Louisiana was placed under Spanish control from 1762 to North America began benefiting the European economy by the start of the 16th century. While this started as a major fishing industry, fur quickly replaced fishing as it was much more profitable. The origin of the fur trade took place with tribes such as the Ottawa and the Huron around the St. Lawrence River. But traders found that other waterways such as the Mississippi would also prove profitable in the fur industry. The French began making trade agreements with tribes such as the Algonquins and the Huron. This angered the Iroquois to the east, who wished to have a monopoly on the fur trade. The Iroquois attacked the French and their allies in what became known as the Beaver Wars. These conflicts lasted most of the 17th century, with the Iroquois destroying many of France's North American allies. The Iroquois accomplished this with support of their English and Dutch allies, but when the Dutch lost their North American colony of New Netherlands, it severely weakened the power of the Iroquois. Most of the casualties of the war were from tribes fighting for their trade partners. While the Iroquois still had the English as their allies, they grew concerned over the rapid development of English colonies along the eastern seaboard and established peace with the French. The Beaver Wars are unique compared to French relations with other North American tribes, as they mostly worked to create proper trade relations. By the mid-18th century, there were less than 100,000 residents of New France. Meanwhile, the 13 colonies had surpassed 1 million residents. While the English focused on a more agrarian society, the French tended to focus on trading expeditions in the region. Intermarriage became very common between French traders and indigenous women. While the French had already established trading partners in the Great Lakes region, they encountered much different indigenous societies in the Mississippi Basin. It was common for traders to establish relations by marrying into a tribe, but Frenchmen were expected to give control of the household and property to their wives. This was not an easy transition for these European grooms, but many southern tribes saw the influx of African and European foreigners, eager to join one of the tribes. New Orleans became the most important city in Louisiana, after it was founded in 1718. It served the same purpose in the Mississippi as Quebec did to the St. Lawrence River. All trade done in the Mississippi Basin would now have to pass through New Orleans, making the city a powerful trade hub. Only 5 years after the city was founded, the capital of the territory was moved to New Orleans. This also allowed the French to push their influence into the Mississippi's tributaries, allowing French trade to move as far west as places like the Dakotas. Slavery was also a big part of Louisiana's economy. The French captured indigenous people as slaves, but this labor was soon replaced by the African slave trade. In 1719, the first African slaves were brought to Louisiana at the city of Mobile, where sugarcane was the dominant cash crop, but was slowly being replaced by cotton. By the mid-18th century, French and British interest in the Ohio Valley were starting to overlay, which eventually resulted in the French and Indian War. The British had the advantage of the massive population of their New World colonies, while the French relied on their indigenous allies. The British had allies as well, such as the Iroquois. The war ended in 1763 with a British victory over the French. The French lost their territory east of the Mississippi along with French Canada. New Orleans and the Louisiana Territory was also ceded to Spain in 1762. This was the Spanish period of Louisiana that lasted from 1762 to 1801. While most French Canadians remained in the region after it was taken over by the British, but others moved to Louisiana. Following the war, French traders established the city of St. Louis, which became a very important trading hub. St. Louis was built in a very strategic location, with its founding being towards the center of the continent. The city connected the eastern seaboard with the Santa Fe Trail and sat in the middle of the Mississippi Basin, allowing movement across the continent. New Orleans fell into hard times during the Spanish period. In 1768, a rebellion sprung up in the city to kick out Spanish authority, but it was eventually crushed. New Orleans also saw a devastating fire in 1768 and in 1794. Both the American Revolution and the French Revolution greatly impacted the status of Louisiana. During the American Revolution, France and Spain supported America during their war with Britain. Spain was only involved in the war, but took no direct action to support American independence. On the other hand, the French trained, armed, and supplied the Continental Army and convinced Spain to allow these resources to reach the Americans via Louisiana. Thanks to Spanish and French support, the Americans won the war in 1783, but it was only a few years later in 1789 that France was in turmoil due to their own revolution. Many European powers tried to quell this rebellion, such as Spain, but after its defeat, Spain relinquished control over Louisiana for exchange for control of an Italian kingdom. This officially ended the Spanish period of Louisiana, and the French regained control by 1801. Louisiana remained part of France for only a short time, as Napoleon sold the territory to the United States to help fund France's wars. Napoleon felt that Louisiana had lost much of its value due to the rebellion going on in Haiti. So, Louisiana was not economically viable for France. In 1809, New Orleans and the surrounding region saw the influx of 10,000 Haitian refugees. They were mixed between freedmen, slaves, and white French. Americans also flooded the region, reinforcing the plantation system. Not long after the Americans purchased the territory, expeditions were planned to explore the newly acquired territory. Lewis and Clark, along with Zebulon Pike, led the most famous of these expeditions. New Orleans also saw combat during the War of 1812. While peace was created between Britain and the United States, the news hadn't made it to New Orleans at the time, and a major battle broke out, which ended with an American victory. New Orleans was also a strategic location during the Civil War, for whoever controlled the city controlled the Mississippi, which was highlighted in the Anaconda Plan. Even though it's hard to believe that the French once controlled a large amount of the United States territories, it can be seen by the names of cities across the Midwest and in the Mississippi Basin, such as Louisville, Des Moines, or Bellefourche. The French left an everlasting impact on the continent.